Hello everyone, I'm Uriah Heep, and this is the Great American Novel Series brought to you by the Author's Matrix. In tonight's episode, we'll be continuing listening to The Village Idiot by Dan Blanchfield, Chapter 23. As you may recall, in Chapter 22, Dr. Higgins went after Nigel in a big way. Will he survive? Let's find out. On to Chapter 23 of The Village Idiot.
Chapter 23. The Board of Directors meeting devolved into chaos following the speech of Dr. Higgins. Some shouts and arguments fell well beneath the dignity of such a group of the most influential educators in the academic world. Nigel sat in his seat, staring ahead, bewildered at how swiftly his academic career appeared to evaporate before his sunken eyes. With all the conversations that filled the room, no one dared speak to Nigel directly. However, Dr. Higgins was not through, and he cleared his throat numerous times to calm the room down so he could continue his onslaught. The gavel held in the hand of the interim dean was pounded repeatedly on the massive oaken table graced by the directors, and silence was had eventually. "I have more to say," Dr. Higgins said quietly to the interim dean. "There is more that the board of directors needs to know." "Quite," declared the interim dean. "Continue." Dr. Higgins turned around to face the faculty once again. "The man among us here in this great hall, Dr. Nigel Crumbly, has disgraced this university just as he disgraced his former one of his youth. Not long ago, I had a private conversation with him in his office, and he tried to push his monumental, despicable theory on water right in his very office. On these hallowed grounds, he committed the most egregious sin of all. A sin that any man who calls himself a scientist would be deeply ashamed to admit. He declared to me that what humanity needed most in this world was what he called fresh, clean, pure water. He went on to claim that all of society's ills related to our health arose from our consumption of raw sewage water for our daily needs. Of course, I remained calm throughout his diatribe, realizing that I was likely in the presence of a madman. I wondered how such a lunatic could have fooled everyone all these years to rise to hold the science chair of the most prestigious university in the land. The faculty sat in stunned silence as Dr. Higgins spoke. Some in the room felt doctor. Higgins was eloquent, while others were furious. Those whose anger had risen with every word that came out of the mouth of Dr. Higgins, as they were traditionally stalwart supporters of Dr. Crumbly, could not fathom why the chair of the science department could have said such nonsense. Dr. Higgins sat down with the ancient edition of the Crumbly Village Times placed gently upon his ample lap. While he appeared serious, self-composed outwardly, the sheer contemptuous joy he felt within could barely be contained. He folded his arms in anxious anticipation of the next move by the board of directors, which he did not have long to wait. The directors huddled among themselves, deliberating for the better part of a quarter of an hour. It was a heated discussion, and the faculty remained in their seats, mesmerized at the activity set before them. Finally, the directors went silent, waiting for their interim dean to address the faculty. "The esteemed board of directors of this magnificent university have decided the matter set before us by the Honourable Dr. Higgins." The murmuring began again, and the interim dean was forced to re-employ his gavel to maintain decorum. "It is the directive of this body to suspend the chair of the science department, Dr. Nigel Crumbly, for a period not to exceed 30 days, while this board will delve into the charges brought to their attention by Dr. Higgins." Once again, the interim dean puffed his gavel and announced that this meeting was officially adjourned. The faculty sat in stunned silence as they had just witnessed the destruction of their chair before their very eyes. As they began to make their way to the exits, Dr. Higgins stood up, placed the newspaper in the hands of the interim dean, and left the room. The seriousness with which he exited belied the broad smile he kept to himself, not even glancing backward to see Nigel's reaction to the proceedings. The dismissal of his foe did not go unnoticed by his colleagues, and everyone had an opinion of his actions that afternoon. Nigel was the last to leave the room, and nobody spoke to him. He had never felt so alone in the world. As he sat there and pondered his future, whatever was left, he wondered how he would tell his dear wife and daughters the terrible news of the day. After packing his necessities from his office, he went to the street below and began the trek home. As he passed the multitudes on the way, he could not help but witness the destruction of humanity in front of his eyes. He saw widows and children covered with sores, gathering even more raw sewage water to carry home to weaken themselves ever more. The unctuous Dr. Higgins had done more damage to humanity in his frontal assault on Nigel than one could imagine. What if he had embraced the new knowledge I had presented? Nigel thought as he walked towards home. How different the day would be. Nigel could never make sense of how the human self could be so against knowledge, especially those who had dedicated their professional careers to its pursuit. He had no answer to that question, and as he looked up, he saw Fiona sitting on the stoop of their flat. He paused for a moment, wondering if he should continue. Nigel gathered the necessary courage and approached the stoop where his lovely wife sat, enjoying the morning. Their children were inside amusing themselves. Fiona did not initially see her husband's approach as her mind was elsewhere. When her attention finally turned in the direction of Nigel, she saw his face and gait, which were now unfamiliar to her. She knew something was greatly amiss and stood up to greet Nigel as he climbed the first step. As husband and wife hugged, Fiona pulled away and looked into her husband's eyes and turned cold. "Nigel," Fiona begged, "something is terribly wrong." Nigel knew that hiding from Fiona was useless and that he needed to tell all. "Come with me, Fiona," he said as he led her inside. As he closed the door, he could not help but notice an elderly woman across the street vomiting as she continued to fill her cup with the raw sewage that flowed in the trench outside their flat and became ill. "You must sit down, Nigel," Fiona implored. Nigel obeyed with little resistance. After a spell, Nigel felt strong enough to speak. It was as though the burdens of the entire world rested on his shoulders. It was not the suspension from the university that was so devastating. He could deal with the internal politics of university life. No, it was the fact that when he had had the opportunity to stand up for the truth many years ago, he failed, and he could see the consequences of that failure everywhere he looked. He felt his wife's caress as he sat in their receiving room and looked at the sores now covering her head. He brushed aside her hair and watched chunks of it fall to the floor. It wasn't the fact that his wife's health had deteriorated so dramatically the past few months. It was that it was perceived by her and everyone else as perfectly normal. How could mankind accept such an existence? Nigel thought to himself as he looked into his wife's sunken eyes. He had been so busy at work of late that even he had not noticed the change in Fiona. Had he come to accept this life they led as standard too, like everyone else, he asked himself. How could I have not even noticed the state of my dear wife's health until this moment? Nigel hugged his wife even closer, which only caused Fiona to perceive something was even more amiss than she felt moments ago on the stoop. She asked, "What is it, Nigel? Are you ill?" Nigel attempted to right himself on the couch as he had slumped too much into the soft cushions to maintain comfort. Sitting up, he took Fiona's hands and summoned the courage to speak. "I have been suspended from the university for a month, my dear, pending further investigation into my past." Fiona was beyond shocked at this revelation. Nigel continued, not waiting for a verbal response from his wife. "Dr. Higgins' charge against me went beyond the verbal thrashing I had given him recently. What else could this miserable shell of a man have said worse than he already had?" asked Fiona. Nigel hesitated, then replied, "At the end of the meeting, Fiona, Dr. Higgins pulled out an old copy of the Crumbly Village Times. The edition featured me on the front page, splashed across it for the world to see." Fiona felt a chill wind blow and was frightened. What article, Nigel? You have never mentioned this article to me before. It is true, my dearest, Nigel said. I have never mentioned this. He went on to tell her the story of the science symposium at the university that nearly ruined all prospects of a career in the field of science. I was humiliated before the world that day, Fiona. The only way to rescue my future was to renounce my studies of water with Addison Way, so I did, much to my disgrace. Dr. Higgins had secured a copy of that day's newspaper, where I was pilloried by the science editor of the Crumbly Village Times. I was savaged. Addison Way? Fiona asked. I told you of my study of water with Addison some time ago, Nigel said. Don't you recall? Fiona was perplexed. I don't seem to recall, Nigel. Who is Addison Way? Nigel stared at his wife in disbelief. He was right when he recalled their conversation where he unveiled all his past to her, including his study of the nature of water with Addison. She had not heard a word I said that day, he concluded to himself. It was as if I was having a conversation with myself. Fiona stared at her husband, with a mingling of disbelief and worry. She said nothing, awaiting his reply. Nigel began to relate his history with Addison. He did not hold back his effusive praise of the man he considered the most brilliant in all the world. In detail, he explained to his dear wife the scientific basis for Addison's theory on the nature of water. As he related more and more details and the fact-based evidence behind everything he said, he became more and more animated. His wife had earned a doctorate in environmental psychology and was a brilliant woman. Surely he felt that if he explained the scientific basis for Addison's work, she would become a willing ally in his pursuit of truth. As he paused, Fiona said, Nigel, my dear, is this what Dr. Higgins exposed to the board of directors in an attempt to destroy your career? Exactly, Nigel said. He used the very scientific knowledge that I have just explained to you to discredit me before the board and the entire science faculty. Demonic, I say. Fiona let go of Nigel's hand and stared off into space. It was like she was now mesmerized by the blank wall on the other side of their receiving room. Nigel waited for some reaction, but there was none. Finally, he spoke. What are you thinking, my dearest? He attempted to join their hands again, but she resisted. He was taken aback and tried again. Fiona, this is a terrible injustice what Dr. Higgins did today. He has not only besmirched my good name, but dragged in the proverbial mud, the greatest scientist of them all, in Addison Way. Nigel, Fiona asked, why is it that I have never heard of this Addison Way in any of my classes in graduate school? Nigel sat there, quiet, for he knew all too well what would come next, and he attempted to gird himself against it. Fiona asked again, this so-called greatest scientist you speak of, he studied where, did you say? It is not the degree that one earns that is the true test of one's scientific credentials, my dear. It is the vast knowledge one has gained from years of careful study and one's desire to see what is true. That is the mark of a true scientist. As he spoke, he could see the disillusionment in his wife's eyes. She was about to slide into the abyss of sheer arrogance and conceit that everyone else Nigel had ever told about Addison Way and his work had fallen into. It was like she was being swallowed into a massive hole of darkness, and Nigel never felt more hopeless than he did at that moment. There was no saving Fiona now, but he tried. Nigel, dearest, Fiona began before Nigel could utter another word. Is this what all this fuss is all about? A mere youthful indiscretion? You met some madman when you were an impetuous youth who fooled you, and now you are expected to pay for this mistake all of your life. I was not fooled, Fiona, Nigel replied. Fiona could hear the frustration in her husband's voice. Nigel, my loving husband, she continued with a bit of condescension in her voice that was evident to Nigel, and which he resented. What youngster hasn't been taken in by a charlatan at one time or another? You have earned your place among the great minds at the University of London. They have seen your brilliance up close every day. Nigel cut off Fiona. I was not a youngster when I met Addison Way. I was a university student in full control of all of my facilities. I was not taken in by some charlatan, as you put it. Rather, I studied what this scientist had come to and recognized his large seeing about the nature of water. There was no one, my dear wife, that had seen what Addison had seen before him, and he was punished by academia and the press for it. The Crumbly Village Times, particularly, was especially egregious in their treatment of Addison. They dubbed him the village idiot, thereby insulting him and everyone who has ever sought the truth. Fiona smiled at the moniker the paper of record had dubbed Addison, and Nigel grew angry. He had seen this mortified conceit in his colleagues at the university, but he never expected to see it in his wife. In his early days at the University of London, he had attempted a few conversations about the nature of water. He even mentioned Addison Way, but the sheer ignorance and superiority evidenced by his colleagues made him realise that it was best to keep his opinion of Addison to himself. He believed it was somewhat of a Faustian deal with the devil, as he hid his genuine opinion of Addison to advance his career, even as he knew that what Addison had taught him was true. He realised that he was now paying dearly for his failure. Fiona, my dearest, Nigel said imploringly, I have carried a burden all these years long before I had the great good fortune to meet you. I have been privy to knowledge no one else has, and the world has punished me furiously. The water we drink from the sewage trenches outside our flat is like poison to our very selves. Look at the sores on your head. Where did they come from? Why do we vomit after every meal while our stomachs churn painfully all day? Can this be the way humanity is meant to live? Addison Way understood the true nature of water and how, by cleansing it and purifying it, we could have life abundantly. It is this pure, clear water that can give everybody life unlike humanity has ever experienced. I have seen it for myself. I have drunk pure water and saw my health and spirits heal. I used to visit Addison in his lab, and I studied with him. He was the most honest, decent person and, by far, the most brilliant scientist I have ever met. All he wanted and worked for all his life was to have humanity healthy and strong, and it was the consumption of this rancid sewage water that prevented that. Nigel waited for a response from Fiona. She scratched the open sores on her head and pulled out yet another chunk of hair, watching it fall to the floor. Outwardly, she appeared calm and composed, but inwardly, she was frightened that she had already lost her husband to this lunacy. Nigel looked into her eyes, sunken deep into her face, and saw ignorance in her vacant look. It was like, as before, she had not heard a word that he had just said. Talk to me, Fiona, my dearest, Nigel implored. I have poured my heart out to you here. I need to know what you are thinking. Fiona finally spoke, but it was not the words Nigel so desperately needed to hear. Nigel, she began, it is if I do not know you. You speak of health and pure water, and I fear you have given way to madness, she began to cry. Who is this man I married? How could I have been so wrong? Fiona, this is sheer lunacy, Nigel, Fiona continued unabated. Look around you, Nigel. What do you see? You speak of all of us as decrepit, lost souls rotting here on God's green earth. Is it so unnatural for us to vomit continuously? These sores you disparage, are they simply a natural consequence of man's fallen nature? You want to blame our consumption of raw sewage water, yet are we not all sinners in the eyes of God? Why do you blame the water? We are all in our natural state here, but you have these fanciful ideas about pure water that border on insanity. I feel you are lost, Nigel. I now see what Dr. Higgins did in unveiling you to the world in the hideous way he did. He was trying to save you, Nigel, and you resist and prefer your God in this lunatic whom you met as a child. It is all so unnatural, Nigel." Fiona could say no more and wept uncontrollably. Nigel had no more words to offer. He was crushed. The surety he had felt moments ago as he spoke of the life-giving nature of pure, clean water had vanished without a trace. At that moment, he realized he had lost his wife and university career. He wished to console her, but she resisted any attempts by her husband. Nigel recoiled and slumped back on the couch and sighed to himself. "Perhaps it would have been better had I never met Addison Way and learned what I had from him," he thought. "This knowledge I possess has been a curse to myself and my family. What have I gained from knowing it if the rest of the world cannot or will not acknowledge it?"
Et tu, Fiona? She turns on Nigel too, along with Dr. Higgins. It looks like the whole faculty at the university. Nigel loses his career and his wife and his family in the same day. All because he knows something that nobody else knows, and they can't see it. That's the burden he carries. So, that concludes chapter 23. On to chapter 24 in the next edition of the Great American Novel Series, brought to you by the Author's Matrix. So, take care, good luck, goodbye, and we'll see you next time.